What's up guys, Jeff Cavalier, ATHLEAN-X.com. Today I want to try to help you to determine how you should be performing your reps on whatever exercise you're performing. Because it's a big question. There's a lot of different ways we could actually lift a weight, right? We can just get it from A to Z. We can really try to get it from A to Z, focusing on a lot of details. We can push it fast, we can push it slow. The rep speed matters, all this stuff, guys. We know we need to focus on it, but what's the right answer? So I have to answer that by first asking you a question. That question is, what are you training for? You see, because if you're training for strength or for hypertrophy, the answer could be different. If you're training for strength, guys, there's one thing that you should always be seeking. The first thing you should be seeking is efficiency. And what I mean by that is you want to try, let's say you're doing a bench press. We realize that the bench press is going to recruit our chest, our shoulders, our triceps. We're not trying to isolate on a bench press if we're trying to improve strength. We're trying to get those muscles to perform the work together. I'm not trying to, in this instance, say, hey, get those shoulders back, yes, to protect the shoulder, but not for the sake of trying to get the chest to drive the movement and really squeeze. Get that hard contraction on the chest as much as you can, squeeze your hands together at the top. No, it's about moving the bar and maintaining a proper bar speed because it matters. Actually moving with a velocity so you can increase your power as well because we know strength and power go hand in hand. So it's not about being specific about trying to isolate a muscle. However, if you're trying to train for hypertrophy, meaning increase the size of a muscle, then you should not be looking for efficiency, but actually inefficiency. How can you actually introduce new ways to make a rep harder? Because the more we can do that, the more stress we can deliver to a muscle and therefore help it to feel more overload and adapt in response by growing bigger. So we have to look at a few different scenarios. I'm going to actually use a lat pull down here, and we're going to take a few examples here, guys, where we actually, let's say, train to a certain rep range for failure. Now, we already know that training to failure is not always essential, especially depending upon the volume of your training. But to make this example very easy to understand, we're going to say training to failure. The first example here would be, let's say I'm using a rep range of, I'll actually write it down here. Let's say I'm training with my 10 rep max on a lat pull down here, and I'm going to fail at 10. But in this one here, I'm actually taking a similar approach to I was when I was training for strength, and that is I'm just worried about going from A to Z, moving the bar from A to Z here. Right? That's the first scenario. The second scenario is I actually use a little bit of a lighter weight. Not much, but let's say 13 rep max, and I'm training to 10 rep max failure. Right? 10 rep failure. So, in these two scenarios, in this one here, I'm really trying to be focused on increasing tension in a specific area of that lift. So if I'm trying to grow my lats from an underhand lat pull down, I'm really trying to squeeze. So let's take a look at what these look like. If I'm doing, let's say the first example here, and I go to pull down, I realize I have the biceps as my friends here. I realize that I have my upper back as my friend. I realize that I have my lats as a friend. I realize that what I'm trying to do is get this bar down to my chest as efficiently as I can with multiple muscles participating. Okay? That's scenario one. And what happens is when I get to about rep number 10, I'm trying to pull and I can't get it anymore because I basically fatigued the overall movement, not necessarily one specific muscle that participates in that movement. That's scenario one. Scenario number two is this one here, where now I'm like, all right, I gotta lighten this up a little bit because what I'm gonna do is I'm going to focus on making this much more of an inefficient movement for my lats specifically. So I don't want an over activation and contribution from my forearms trying to cheat this. I don't want my biceps pulling too much here. I want to get my elbows down into my sides, adducted hard, and back into extension so I can actually maximally activate the lats. So it looks more like this. I come down, squeeze, I hang out there for a second, I come up a little bit slower for the eccentric, I'm down, squeeze, and come up, squeeze, and come up, squeeze, and come up, squeeze, and I come up, right? So, and let's say on the last rep, I fail at 10. Now that is a weight that I could actually normally handle if I didn't do all those extra things for a few more reps, 12 to 13 in particular. But I stopped at 10 because I couldn't do any more. Those extra intensifying techniques leveled me out. Okay, so now, what's that do? Well, if we look at a graph here. If this is intensity, right? And this is my reps from 1 to 6 to 10, or 1 to 5 to 10, let's say, halfway. If we start on this graph with those two types of training, what do we have? Well, we know that the first one, the true 10 rep, the 10 done for 10, and not worrying about the journey so much, that's going to be an intensity level, let's say, of here. Okay? Now, the one that was at a 12 to 13 rep max, where would that fall on this intensity curve in terms of the rep? So now, below it, he's right, because it's a lighter weight. The intensity driven by that rep is a little bit lighter. However, you know, I hope, that I could take this, and depending upon how I performed that rep in the journey that I did take to get to A to Z, I could take this way the hell down below this. And if you need to see an example of that, all you got to do is look at the following example here. If I have some weight on here, just because it's a heavier weight doesn't mean that when I get in here and I start doing this, which you see a lot of guys do, that does absolutely nothing. That's bullshit when it comes to developing and trying to create hypertrophy in the lats. That is just a waste of time and effort. So I just took this, which was a heavier weight, and I dropped it all the way down here. All right, so we're not talking about that. We're talking about this example here. However, do realize that I could take that weight that I had that was a slightly lower weight, and I can bring that intensity level right up from rep 1 up here or even higher because of how much intensity and focus I put into the initial rep. And then what winds up happening is their journey throughout the set. So as this one goes, this is a high intensity rep, this is a high intensity rep, this is a high intensity rep, this is a high intensity rep. I also have this mounting intensity here just because of the overall fatigue. So it's climbing, it's climbing, it's climbing, it's climbing, it's climbing. I get to 10 and I'm done. This one down here, this is pretty easy in terms of the intensity level because I'm not applying any of those extra techniques. And you guys have felt that yourself. You go through rep 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It feels like the only ones that are hard are the last couple. That's what I'm talking about here. They're here, they're here, they're here, they're here. Oh, we start to get towards the end. Now it kind of shoots up, and it might even end a little bit more intensely because it was a heavier weight that we used. But look at the difference in the quality of that set. This is where I tell people all the time, you seek inefficiency when you're trying to get hypertrophy, and you're always going to wind up in a better place because all this accrued additional intensity underneath this graph is what creates that stimulus for growth and overload that's much more significant than what we could do here. Now, a couple more points. This is all meaningful, guys, I'm telling you. If I take this concept, I go, I knew it. All I need to do is go really light and get that tension. Time under tension is everything. Guys, I preach time under tension a lot, but it's not always a blanket statement of time under tension because I can come here and go, and squeeze as hard as I want, squeeze, 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 up, squeeze, 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 and that slow eccentric, slow, 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 you know, all this, super slow motion. That's not doing anything either, guys. The threshold for intensity was too low. This weight was not enough to cross that threshold to even make it productive, unless you were training for metabolic overload, and a lot of guys are not necessarily prepared to train metabolically. So then you could say, well, if that's the case, do I discredit this attempt, this approach? And my answer to that also is, no, you don't discredit that approach. Why? Because this is still there's still a huge value to this, guys. Despite the fact that this is great at creating hypertrophy, this is also great at a lot of other things. Number one, it's actually great at strength training. Just like it was on the example in the bench press in the beginning, if I get stronger on this, if I become good at efficiently moving this bar even on a lat pull down to the point where I can keep increasing this pin from workout to workout to workout to workout, am I not getting stronger on this lift? All strength doesn't have to happen in a 2 to 3 to 5 rep range. That's a myth. You can get stronger in any rep range. But as this top end strength improves, guess what happens to this little green mark? Because it starts down here, well, this would go up. My overall strength would go up. I might start at a higher level there, but the green also starts at a higher level. So then when the green jumps up, it jumps up to a higher intensity level there. So bringing up our top end strength is also going to bring up that adjusted strength that we had on that second example. So guys, all of this matters. When you go to train, you have to understand how you're training. You have to understand the goals of your training, and more importantly, you have to understand why you're there in the first place. It's not about moving from point A to point B or point A to point Z, however we do it. Sometimes it's about the journey in between, depending upon what it is you're training for. There's a reason why we follow different rep ranges and when we program them. We program them at specific places to elicit specific responses, and we do that in all of our programs depending upon the goal that you're trying to achieve right now.